Coming up on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University, the drought is expanding, and so is my inbox with several questions about the drought as water conservation picks up and people are trying to hit the lake in lower lake levels. The desperate need for rain continues. We're speaking to the North Carolina Climate Office about how this drought compares to the 2007 historical drought in the Carolinas. Plus, the North Carolina Department Advisory Council is here at me today to talk about some educational tips they're giving to the public as water conservation picks up. So is the drought. I'm also talking about the science behind one weather scenario that could bring us several days of rain during the late spring and early summer months. We'll detail the science with that, all coming up on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. And folks, it starts right now. Welcome into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen State News Plus. A big welcome to our YouTube viewers as well. If you're tapping in with me at WXBrandon9 on IG or on X and even Facebook, my meteorologist Brandon Lawson page, always appreciate that as well. And a lot of questions have been filtering into my inbox this week. And the biggest question I'm getting is what is going on with this drought? It's a drought we've been talking about really for a few months now. We've been talking about how the wildfire threat has been really picking up here rapidly over the last few months. And we've been discussing the drought, and it's been a big topic. And unfortunately, I think people are just now recognizing that the drought is actually a big deal right now. And as temperatures warm up, people get outdoors, they're trying to hit the lake, and they're seeing the lake levels are lower. People are scraping their boats, and I think people are just getting the impacts of it now that we're warming up. And to talk about the drought today, I'm joined by a special guest. I've got Corey Davis from the North Carolina State Climate Office there. He's the assistant North Carolina State climatologist. And Corey, I feel like you've been busy and your inbox has been filling up a lot this week over the drought too, my friend.
It has been, and I've noticed the same thing, Brandon. It seems like this drought has snuck up on a lot of people because suddenly we're in the spring. They're starting to notice their lawns are brown. They're starting to notice the local rivers and streams are low, and now we're starting to get those water restrictions. But of course, we've been tracking this drought for more than 6 months now. We first started getting into this dry spell at the end of summer last year. Of course, late last summer, early fall, it was pretty quiet hurricane season. We really didn't see that tropical impact along our coast, so we missed out on some of the rain that we usually expect that time of the year. We know this past winter we were in a La Nina pattern. That usually means drier than normal weather for the Carolinas, and it did for us this year. And now that we've gotten into the spring, it has heated up. We have seen summer-like temperatures over the past month, and of course it has stayed dry, less than half an inch of rain all month in parts of the Carolinas. So that's why we've seen this drought accelerate, no doubt. But again, this has been a more long-term event. It's been with us for several months now.
Yeah, and I was actually just kind of crunching some of the numbers this morning and just looking at some of the data. Just taking one of our weather computers full screen here. So this is looking at the 2025 fall precipitation. We had an inch under normal for September. We're almost an inch under normal for October. We're almost 3 inches below normal in November. Then when you go to winter, we were about 2 inches under in both December and January. Still a little bit under in February, and in winter it puts us about 4.3 inches below normal. And then spring hasn't really helped us either. They say April showers bring May flowers, but unfortunately that's not the case this year. Looking at about 2 inches below normal already here for April. And then March in Charlotte, we had the third or eighth driest March on record. So again, it has just been incredibly dry. So far in April or in spring, we're already about 5 inches in the hole. So I do like how you mentioned this has been something that's been going on for quite some time. Why do you feel like people are just now starting to realize it or get into it? I was thinking maybe it has to do with the warmer weather, more people are getting out. But again, we've got a lot of questions about this drought this week, and we've been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, we're not used to talking about drought and drought impacts over the wintertime. Usually during the cool season, we're just not seeing as much outdoor activity. Farmers are not growing as many crops at that time of the year. Of course, the grass is usually brown and dormant during the winter. And I think one thing that surprises a lot of people is that the snow we had in late January, early February really didn't have that much of an impact on improving the drought. It was definitely a nice snow, a foot in the Charlotte area, but not a lot of that snow actually melted and infiltrated the ground. A lot of it actually sublimated, so it went straight from ice into a gas form, and it really didn't have as big of an impact as we would have hoped. And again, it's just stacking those dry months together. The year to date is the driest on record so far for the Charlotte area. Nearby places like Monroe are also running on their driest on record last 6 months. So we have just not seen the rain or any precipitation that we've needed over that longer time spell. And yeah, now that we're getting those warmer days in the spring, it's been like waking up a sleeping bear. That drought is suddenly angry and we're all feeling the effects.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been talking about the 2007 drought. I know we have a lot of newer folks here in the Carolinas. I grew up here in Charlotte, and I know you grew up in the Carolinas as well. And a lot of folks have been moving to this area. But in 2007, we had a very historical, significant drought here in the Carolinas. And just kind of pulling that up for us here, you could actually see the two droughts here. I've got 2007 December when that drought really ramped up, and then also April 2026, the drought that we're currently under right now. And you can see the exceptional drought took over our actually entire Queen St. News viewing area here. And then you look further to the right there, and you see April 2026. I mean, we've got extreme drought creeping in, but it could be a lot worse as we get towards the summer. Can you just talk about some of the differences between these two? Because I know a lot of folks have been talking about the 2007 drought. What are some of the differences that we have with this drought and maybe some of the similarities that we have from 2007 to this one?
Yeah, that 2007 drought is really the benchmark for bad droughts in the Carolinas. And of course, a lot of folks are seeing those similarities because now some places are being asked to conserve water. That was widespread, especially by the late summer and fall of 2007 when we were in those exceptional drought conditions. And on the drought map now, we are getting into that extreme level. That's not far away from where we were at the peak of that 2007 drought, but some of the big differences mainly in the time of year when these droughts emerged. That 2007 drought started in far western North Carolina, coming out of a fairly dry winter, but an especially dry spring in that part of the state. And then it just ramped up over the summer. Very fast emerging, like you're showing here. We went through one of the hottest and driest summers on record, including the hottest August on record in North Carolina. After that, there was just no water left. It had all evaporated during those summer months, and that's why we were seeing such dire conditions and water restrictions. The current drought has mainly been a cool season drought to this point. Like we mentioned, it started last fall and over the winter, just not getting the rain we expected at those times of the year. We're certainly seeing it intensify now in the spring, but in some ways, that could be a good sign. If this is the driest that it gets, it means that we were getting those rainfall deficits out of the way in a time of the year when they don't matter as much. But as you're noting here, it could also be a bad sign. That means that we are already getting a head start on those rainfall deficits compared to what we saw in 2007. So again, if this summer and even fall stays dry, that could mean that we are seeing even bigger impacts than we did back in that event 19 years ago.
And then some of the similarities, it appears more of the similarities have been, a lot of people have been tying this to La Nina. We're still seeing the significant wildfire threat that we saw in 2007. And looks like we could be experiencing some long term impacts from this as well. And that kind of leads to my next question, Corey. What does the long term climate outlook look like when it comes down to this drought? We're getting ready to get even hotter as we head more towards the summer months. And I mean, this is our rainy season right now. Spring, we tend to start getting a good amount of rain here. Then as we get towards the summer, less fronts, we get more hit or miss storms. So what does the long term outlook look like?
Yeah, we sure wish we had some of those April showers because right now we are not looking at that many May flowers with as dry as it's been. You showed those rainfall deficits, how those have added up over the last 6 months or so. That means right now in the Charlotte area, we are running more than 15 inches below normal since this dry spell began in August. We're not going to get that much rainfall from one event or even in 1 month. So that means it is going to take a lot longer for us to slowly chip away at these deficits. Ideally, what we would like to see is every week getting an inch or two. That gets us at least back to our normal precipitation, if not a little bit more than that. But even if we stack together 2 inch per week rainfall totals, it would still take about 4 months to fully chip away at this drought. So that means that we are in it for the long haul. That means that we will continue to see some sort of drought impacts through the rest of spring, through the summer, maybe even into the fall. Certainly, we hope that the pattern changes and we start getting a little bit more rainfall. That may tamp down some of the dryness and drought that we're seeing now. That may extend the life of some of our water supplies. But again, this drought will not disappear overnight or even in 1 month. It'll be with us for at least a while longer.
I mentioned my inbox has been filling up with drought related questions, but also filling up with a lot of El Nino questions as well. I think a lot of social media attention has been put on El Nino, especially with the chance of it being a super El Nino later this year, just a very strong El Nino, likely really taking over by late this year. How could El Nino help or hurt this situation when it comes down to the drought?
These headlines are attention grabbing. You see not just Super El Nino, but in some places a Jurassic El Nino, a
Yeah.
Godzilla El Nino. My goodness, what will that mean?
It's been
Uh,
crazy this year. I mean, I literally, I like, we talk about El Nino and La Nina a lot, but I feel like this year, at least since I've been studying meteorology and looking at it over the last decade or so, it's gotten a lot more attention than I can remember.
That's right. And I think one thing that most folks should understand is that this does represent a pattern change. Over the last 2 winters, we have been in a La Nina pattern that generally tends to favor drier than normal conditions in our part of the country, but that's mainly during the cool season. During the warm season, like we're going in now, we don't see as much of an influence from either El Nino or La Nina. And in fact, the earliest impacts we may see this year from El Nino could actually be negative ones for us. El Nino usually reduces tropical activity in the Atlantic. That's because it strengthens the upper level winds, and that can shear apart these developing tropical systems. So maybe by the peak of hurricane season in September, or for a few months after that, we may also miss out on some of the tropical activity we expect if it's just a fairly quiet season. But when we do expect a turnaround as late fall, early winter this coming season, that usually means we are getting a stronger jet stream that's bringing more moisture, more storm systems to our south, up along our coastline. El Nino winters are almost always wetter than normal in the Carolinas. So we think even if we are still in drought going into next winter, there's a pretty decent chance we'll get some good precipitation then and at least be able to chip away at the drought like we haven't been able to do this spring.
My next question, Corey, really my last question before I let you go here. How do we get through this? I know in 2007, 2008, we were in that drought all through the fall, winter months. And then we didn't end that drought. It took about 9 or 10 months for that drought to end from 2007 to 2008. And it seemed like working together was the way they got through it then. Now, how do we get through it now that we're heading into more of the hotter months? If we continue with this drier pattern, what can people do to help and make sure we have enough water to get through it?
Yeah, it really does take all of us. And you look at these extreme drought conditions that we're in by right now, by definition, those only occur about 5% of the time or less. So when we see people being asked to save water, being asked to follow burn bans and other local advice, this is a vast minority of the time that we're asking folks to do that. This is not becoming the norm. Again, this is just one of those rare events that happens in the Carolinas sometimes and that hasn't happened in almost 20 years across the Piedmont areas. So again, it takes that cooperation. And I like to encourage folks just be aware of where your water comes from and how much you're using in your household. At some point, you may be asked to take shorter showers or make sure your dishwasher is full before it runs. Again, those are just smart energy and water saving things that'll also cut down on your monthly water bill. So really, it's just smart to be more aware and be a little more careful about the water that you're using.
Corey, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today. Again, that is Corey Davis, assistant North Carolina State climatologist, joining us here on Pinpoint Weather University. And Corey, how can people stay connected to you guys? I know you guys are always releasing blogs and just little snippets on the drought every time the drought monitor gets released every Thursday by the United States Geological Survey. So, how can people stay connected to you guys?
Yeah, I encourage folks to go to our website. It's climate.ncsu.edu. Also, check out our social media, including at NCSCO on X. Like you said, we're posting weekly drought infographics there. We'll have blog posts a few times a month, including of a webinar that we just put on about the ongoing drought. So that's a great way for folks to learn more about how we got in this situation, what impacts it's having, and what may happen next.
All right, Corey Davis again with the North Carolina Climate Office here, Assistant North Carolina State Climatologist. Thanks again, Corey, for coming on the show with us. I'm sure that we're going to be connecting with you a lot more here, especially as this drought continues and as it takes a little bit of time to get out of this. We'll continue to work together to do it, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Brandon.
And coming up after the break, we actually have another guest that's going to be joining us on the show today. We're going to be speaking with the chair of the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council. They're letting us know how they're planning to help us get through this drought here in the state of North Carolina. Details on that coming up next on Pinpoint Weather University. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus, talking a lot about the drought right now. The drought is getting a little bit more serious here in the Carolinas, especially now that it's heating up. A lot more water usage is happening. People are trying to get out of the lake, and we were just talking about that with Corey Davis with the North Carolina Climate Office just a few moments ago. And now I'm actually going to be bringing on the chair of the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council. And Klaus, we see the drought right now. Klaus and Burton joining us. You can see it's still showing that extreme drought over the area. And we spoke about, I'd say, probably 4 or 5 months ago. It was during the winter at some point, and we were watching this drought grow. And I feel like the drought's getting more attention now, and I feel like business is picking up for you guys there at the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council for sure.
Yeah, so back in the fall, it was already starting to form. Some areas were 3, 4 inches behind. Unfortunately, now those same areas are 12 to 15 inches behind. We've had a few rains, but nothing significant.
Now, when it comes down to you guys at the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council, what do you do now? Now that the drought's getting more extreme, now that it's creating more impacts, what is your role there now at the council?
Yeah, so it's definitely shifting into more of the education. Again, back in the fall, we're just keeping an eye on it, seeing how things progress. But now, we're going to start seeing a lot of towns putting in conservation measures, you know, pictures like that. Yeah, the lakes are going to be going down. So, really getting out some of the education, letting folks know what to expect and answering questions about conservation, uh, where things are headed, what people need to be doing.
And then what are some of those educational factors that you guys will be bringing in? I know you mentioned you're going to be speaking with some folks coming up here on Thursday, April 23rd, as the new drought monitor comes out, and just continuing to educate the public. What are some of those educational tips you're going to be handing out to the public here as we get more into this drought?
Yeah. So, a lot of it tomorrow is going to be talking about how we got to where we are. You've been watching it, I've been watching it, but a lot of people, over the wintertime, maybe didn't notice that it wasn't raining as much as normal. But so talking about that and also impacts, there's a big uh, wildfire risk right now. Things are so dry and, low humidity. So, letting people know, really be careful about that. And then also about conservation, where they should look for information about conservation.
And another question I had too, it kind of hinges on the program you guys have there with the North Carolina Drought Management Advisory Council. We had a historic drought in 2007. And I believe last time you spoke to me, Klaus, you were mentioning that that was a big driver for starting programs like the one you're chair of.
Right. And so a lot of the legislation and kind of guidelines that were put into place back in 2007, 8 are really getting implemented now. Uh, you know, Cities need to have water shortage response plans that are tied to specific triggers, conservation measures. So the 2007, 8 did kind of give the state a wake up call, and now we're putting a lot of those practices into place.
And my last question for you, it just has to do with the water conservation. A lot of people have been messaging me all over social media, talking about the drought more over the last week or so. And it has been as the water conservation has really picked up. We have seen wildfire danger, but wildfire doesn't necessarily apply to everyone because not everybody burns, but everyone uses water. You need water for hydration. You need water for showers. You need water for the dishes. Even if you're trying to wash your hands, I mean, everybody uses water. So I feel like that's why the drought's getting a lot more attention now. But what are some tips that you have for the public in regards to water conservation? How can people conserve water during this time?
Yeah, so the best place for most people to look is at the utilities website. I was just looking at Charlotte Water's website, and they've got good recommendations about what sort of conservation people should be doing. A lot of just common sense, trying to be more conscientious about how much water they use. Don't if you're going to be watering the lawn, try and do it in the morning when temperatures are low. That way you get, the most water on the lawn instead of evaporating. Don't try not to water the sidewalk or the street because that's just wasted. But as far as regular use, like you said, washing your hands, washing the dishes, flushing the toilet, especially right now, it's just, be conscientious, but it's not restrictive yet.
And any other tips you might have, just for the public? Anything that you think might be important to add to our conversation today about the drought? I do know that it can be a long time to recover from these. Do you think maybe this could be something we're in for the long haul?
We're definitely going to be seeing some of the impacts through the summer, even if our pattern does change in May, which, statistically it should. But,
Yeah.
we should be in a better shape right now than we are anyway. So, we could stay in a dry pattern. Again, we're 12, 15 inches behind. So it's going to take a while, even if we do get some good rains the next few months.
Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson. We've been talking a lot about the drought this episode, and I feel like it's warranted. A lot of questions have been coming because of the water restrictions and all the outdoor festivities that we like to do on the lake. Some of that stuff kind of coming to a halt here as temperatures warm up, and I think that is allowing people to be a little bit more concerned. Is the thing is, I was just actually talking about it over the break with Klaus. We were talking about how, during the winter, you might not have these impacts as much, right? We're not using as much water. And then when we get into the spring, we've got wildfire danger, but not everybody's burning. People across the Carolinas, there's some that do burn brush, but not everybody burns brush. Not everybody has a fire pit. Not everybody has a fireplace that they use. However, everybody uses water. So when you tell somebody to take a shorter shower, when you tell somebody to only use a dishwasher when the dishwasher is full, when you tell somebody they can't rinse the pollen off their car but once or twice a week, we got problems, right? It's impacting you. So now I feel like it is getting a little bit more attention, and a lot of folks are really interested. Now, as it gets attention, many folks want to know how we get out of this. Now, I'm not going to be a buzzkill here, but I do hate to say it. It's going to take time. It takes time to get out of drought. Droughts do not end in 1 month. They don't end in 3 months, especially a drought like this one that's so extreme. This is going to take several months, maybe even until later in the year to officially get over the drought. And that's only if we get into more of a rainy pattern. It could go even longer if we stay dry. I've been using the credit card example a lot, but Klaus over the break actually used a really good example. Imagine missing a paycheck for 6 months and you finally get your paycheck. You're able to eat your food, but it's not helping your debt out too much, right? So we're behind by 6 months of rain, and we need to get ahead of that by getting way over our averages over the next several months. And you don't want to get too much rain to create flooding. So I want to point out one scenario that might help us. We see it a lot in late spring, early summer. It's called a cutoff low. Let me go ahead and pull it up for you full screen. So a cutoff area of low pressure. Again, you've got your jet stream to the north. That is that ribbon of flow in the upper levels. That's where all your storm tracks are up there, the upper levels along the jet stream. Jet stream controls a lot of the weather patterns. But what happens if a little piece of energy or an area of low pressure gets cut off from that? So what ends up happening is when those areas of low pressure, they get away from the jet stream, they get cut off from the main flow. And when they get cut off from the main flow, they just kind of meander around a certain area. However, if we get a cutoff low, it tends to lead to a lot of rainy weather wherever it sits because it's just constantly creating lift in the atmosphere to create showers and potential storms. And it's also continuing to bring in moisture in certain areas as well, which keeps the precipitation higher for several days. So this is a look at a scenario again that we can tend to see late spring, early summer as we get into that time period. Sometimes you get little areas of low pressure cut off from the main flow of the jet stream, and that area of low pressure it gets cut off from the jet stream from the main flow. It can actually create more of a Gulf moisture stream for us here in the Carolinas and across the eastern U.S. And it can lead to several days of rainfall as you're getting that continuous Gulf moisture. It's a really good pattern to get us out of drought. I shouldn't say get us out, but at least help alleviate things. something we'll be watching for as we go through the next several months. We need cutoff lows like this. Now, there's another scenario that can help you get out of a drought. It's a scenario I don't really want, but it's a tropical system. Tropical systems can create abundant amount of moisture over an area. But when tropical systems make landfall, they also can lead to catastrophic impacts like storm surge, damaging winds. You also can get, I mean, we saw with Hurricane Helene how historic that storm was. Even if you get a weaker tropical cyclone, it can cause significant issues as well. So that's why I've been seeing a lot of people say, oh, tropical cyclone, yeah, that can help us out. But I don't really want that because I think it can lead to even greater impacts than what we're seeing right now. Drought's a quiet impact when it comes down to weather. Before we go, I just want to mention this. Drought, it's quiet because you don't see destruction with it. You don't see mass damage and destruction over areas after a drought. You see low water levels. You have a lot of water conservation, different things like that. And you do get concerned about maybe water supply running low. However, you don't see the mass destruction that you see after a tornado or after a tropical system, things like that. So how do we end this without creating mass damage? Well, I think a cutoff low would be a good way of doing that, or several cold fronts one week and another week and another week. And then the other thing you don't want too much rain in one week to create flooding, because whenever you have dry soil like we have right now, let me show you this clip here. Again, this is pretty dry soil. I mean, you're looking at this is Lake Wiley here that's running low. And again, we are talking about very dry soil. So whenever the water hits the soil, it doesn't immediately saturate into it. It just kind of sits there. So if you get heavy rain or heavy amounts of rain in one week, it can actually cause flooding issues pretty quickly because you get runoff very easily. So just some things to think about. We're in a drought. We're going to get through it together, and we're going to work together. How do I always end the show in Pinpoint Weather University? I say take care of yourself and each other as we navigate this earth together. I'm taping this on Earth Day. We're continuing to take care of our earth, and we're doing it together. And that's how we do it, folks. That's how you get through things. That's how we've been through Helene. That's how we're going to get through this drought. That's how we're going to get through things in the foreseeable future. That's going to do it for this episode of Pinpoint Weather University. Take care of yourself and each other as we navigate this earth together, my friends. Y'all be easy. Be careful.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.